Chris, I rolled a 0. Or a 10,
Zero.
rather.
Okay, yeah. Andy, so when you roll a 10, I don't know if this has happened before, you get to pick one.
Oof. I have to look at these. I have to pick one.
Yeah, you can also take the coward's way out and re-roll
Oh, yeah.
if you want.
We
And
are
let fate
about
decide
rolling
you.
for topic, not choosing a topic. So I'm going to roll again. I rolled a 9.
You did?
Yeah, I did, yes.
Okay, all right. Well, we are going to change that. Here, let's do
Ladies
this.
and gentlemen, you are hearing a GM fudging the die rolls live because I think I rolled one Chris doesn't want to talk about.
Yeah. Oh no.
You know what,
Yeah.
Chris? That this one, it fell off to the side of the table, and so
Oh,
maybe it
is it
didn't.
doing that thing where it's like on a piece of
Yeah,
paper?
it
and
wasn't
you're
a
not
clean
quite
landing. So we're gonna roll one
Okay.
more time. Okay.
Go for it.
Okay. I rolled a 3.
A 3, Andy. Today we'll be discussing how do you handle mazes in your games?
Oh, by avoiding putting them in my games. But I look forward to talking about this.
Hello and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics related to running role-playing games. I'm Chris Salzman.
And I'm Andy Rao.
And it is just us today. We just have rolled on the table, and we're going to get into that topic pretty soon. But before we do that, Andy, you had said before you had a question for me, or for yourself and me.
Yeah, well, it's just a pretty simple one. Lord willing and the creek don't rise. It seems like we might be rounding the bend, or whatever the metaphor is, on the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering, I don't know what your vaccination status is or those of your gaming friends, but are you thinking about what you want to play or run after the pandemic ends and you can get back in person? Do you have like a game that you've been saving for the last year because you don't want to run it online? You need to run it in person.
Yeah, I have started thinking about doing some in-person gaming. There was a group that I played with. We just did a one-shot. It was like a 2-night one-shot a while back. That was super fun. They played like a group of circus performers together. So it was a really fun setup for a one-shot. But the Candlekeep Mysteries book is coming out pretty soon.
That's
for
right.
D&D.
Yep.
5th edition. And so that's a series of one-shots that are like, I think they're all loosely related in that the idea is that they can all start sort of in a library inside the Candlekeep library. So I might try to do a couple of those. I have it on pre-order. I'm going to see if they're good or not. I'm sure they're great. But yeah, I might want to try to get that group back together, try a few of those.
That's great. So yeah, is that something that you would run online if it turns out that the social distancing is needed for longer, or are you holding out to play that in person?
Yeah, I would play it in person. I just don't think I'm not the right kind of DM for playing D&D online. I think there are other games that work well. But for that group, I think, and then also the way I'm foreseeing these one-shots going, I think that has to be in person, for me, at least to get a lot of enjoyment out of it. But maybe I'll be wrong, and it's like, oh, this is actually perfect to just jump online to do.
We've talked a lot about the general topic of gaming online over the last several months, and one thing we haven't really talked about is what kinds of games work, what kinds of role-playing games work well online. Because I think I would agree with you in my limited experience that D&D, you certainly can run a rocking game of D&D online, but it seems harder to do than other games.
Yeah, it's odd though, because in some ways it should work better than other ones, because there's a very rigid like turn order. The thing that I find with playing online and heck, having like Zoom meetings and stuff is you're never quite sure like who's supposed to be talking next unless you have someone saying like, okay, now it's your turn, right? So D&D should work super well in that format, but I think there's a lot of crosstalk that ends up happening even within someone's turn about like what they should do and where people are positioned, and characters and enemies and stuff, that it's just really hard to pull off well online. And again, maybe it's like you got to play with everybody who has amazing mics and good webcams and have a digital map and stuff that you're all looking at. Maybe that would be different, but that's just not the setup that I have.
Oh, for sure. I was playing in a D&D game a week or so ago using Fantasy Grounds, and that one of the selling points of playing that D&D game was that we get to check out Fantasy Grounds like extremely robust support for 5th edition, especially combat and stuff. So you can, it's got all the combat conditions and all the rules all ready to go and to apply. And for me, when I try those things, it ends up just highlighting how much of the rules I ignore. Because on paper, it sounds great, like that there's full 5th edition support. But in practice, if I'm really only playing 20% of 5th edition as the rules go, then it's not as helpful as you would think. But.
Yeah, that reminds me of the first time I played a Magic the Gathering game with some sort of online, adjudicated, some sort of online thing. I was like, oh, wow, I don't actually know how to play this game at all.
Yes, I've had that exact experience, yes.
Yeah, it turns out there's this like highly rigid turn order that me and my friends just ignored completely because, it was more fun.
Oh, yes, totally. So, now, before the show, you were also saying that you had something you wanted to jump into before we hit that topic of mazes.
Yes.
So, take it away, Chris.
Yeah, so I am going to do a thing that I like. I don't know if anyone else likes, but we're going to build another D6 table live on the air. I think it's fun. So at least in Michigan in the United States, we have just gone through this thing that we do all optionally called daylight savings time.
Oh.
It is the worst possible thing in the world to do to people with kids in their lives, is to just change the time for no reason. With that in mind, I'd like to build a D6 table about things that can happen related to like a mysterious clock in your game.
Oh, huh.
Yeah, so like when you either, like when the players get this, let's just call it like just to narrow it, let's call it like a pocket watch. So like they get a pocket watch. Like what are some effects that pocket watch could have in the game?
Okay.
So I mean the obvious one based on real life right now is like. The watch can like set time back an hour.
Like time travel you back an hour?
Yeah, like time travel. Yeah, like a time turner from Harry Potter, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say something similar, just thinking of how these things are used in video games, like letting you pause time for like 10 seconds or something like that.
Oh, I mean that's good.
Well, it's just a variant of the one you said there, but
yeah, it's like the freeze frame sort of thing from like sitcoms where someone can, like pause time and then like, talk while everybody's like frozen in midair.
Yeah. Okay, so what are some other time related? How else does time like crop up in an RPG that a watch could affect?
It's a good question. Like I'm mostly brought this up right because I'm salty about daylight savings time, but like thinking about it in an RPG context. Yeah, I mean, like you could do stuff like the holder can move twice as fast.
Yeah, it doesn't all have to be related to time travel, I guess. Although that's the only place my mind is stuck on time travel right now.
Oh, what if what if the hands map to an important event that the players like don't quite know, but like it's counting down to a certain time.
Okay.
Counting down to an important event. Whether the players know it or not.
What if you have the watch at the appropriate place and you set the hands to the exact time, it creates an effect like it summons something.
Okay, I like that. Summons like Kronos himself.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. You kind of going back like the last one that I said. I mean, I do like the idea of it. Like taking down to an important event, but also just if it's just tied to like someone's lifespan, right? So it's just like you have this thing and you know that like when it hits midnight, like that's the time you die. It's the time that character dies.
That's a little grim, but yes.
Okay.
So how many things on our table of topics do we have?
There's a bunch of them. I don't know if any of them are good, but
okay. Well, so, it was never a criteria for these little table creation things that the ideas be good. So.
Yeah, this might become a D1 table by the time we're done. But let me read what we have so far. You can use it to set time back an hour. You can use it to pause time for 10 seconds, other than for yourself. The holder can like move twice as fast. The counting down to some sort of important event. If you take it and set the watch at a specific place to a specific time, you can summon something. Or it's just tied directly to someone's lifespan. So as soon as it hits midnight. they're done for.
What if the bearer of the watch can just cause a target to hear in their head like an auditory illusion of just like a deafeningly loud ticking clock?
I like that. Like the telltale heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let's just call it there.
Okay.
If listeners, if you have any, you can feel free to send them into us and we can add them to the table.
Yeah, if you've used the clock in a cool way, or if one's featured in your campaign, I'd actually be really interested to hear that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for the diversion. As always, I enjoy it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So, shall we jump right into our topic then?
Yes, yeah, let's jump into that, right? So the topic that you rolled, which means that you have a lot to say about it, is how do you handle mazes in your games?
Isn't it funny how the table just magically knows like what you have a lot to say about?
Yeah.
So I'll start, as I often do, with a tale from yesteryear. So pull up your chairs, listeners. Andy's going to once again wax nostalgic about the good old days. So I'll tell you how I handled mazes when I was first learning to GM. And that is, I didn't abstract the experience of navigating the maze in any way. So I tried to just describe to the players what they were looking at in the maze. So like you see, the tunnel extends about 30 feet forward and there's a turn to the left and a turn to the right. And the players would try to map it. It would be a huge just disaster, and then I would hand wave them getting to the end of the maze. So don't really recommend that, but when I'm running an adventure and there's a maze, and by maze I mean anything that's sort of a labyrinthine structure that players have to navigate through. So could have been a giant rat warren or whatever it is, but so I've like done that kind of very literal maze approach before, and it didn't work very well.
Were you trying to replicate an experience, like a video game experience, when you were doing that, or was that just how it made sense to you to map it out, right? Because like early 3D video games sort of did have that, right? You're just sort of looking down the corridor, you walk 30 feet, and then there's a left and a right.
Yes, and in fact, I don't know if it was conscious, but certainly the implementation of mazes in games that I would have been exposed to was like Bard's Tale and Ultima and all those other games that do exactly like you're saying. So yeah, I suppose I was kind of unconsciously just trying to recreate that experience of being in that crude 3D maze on your Atari ST or whatever.
Isn't it like, as we're talking, like there's when you think about mazes, right, there's like the first person perspective and then the top down perspective as well, right? So like when you're typically doing a maze like on a piece of paper, right, like you're drawing the top down perspective. You're not drawing the from their eyes looking forward, walking through the maze. And I'm thinking about like mazes that I've done in real life, for example, like so something as simple as like playing laser tag, for example, right? Like this is the thing I can think about right now. I'm sure there's better examples, but like when you're playing laser tag, there's like an arena set up, right? And there's some elevation and verticality and stuff to it, but there's also like different twists and turns that you can go through. And I personally don't have a great sense of direction, so when I think back to those times of like playing laser tag and stuff, the whole like the map as you were felt just vast because I couldn't really piece together like what's behind that turn, like that. But I have this experience of one time they flipped the lights on in there, and we could kind of see the whole thing instead of it being dark and black light and stuff like that. And it was very small. It felt odd, like how small this thing was and how constrained it was too.
How do you ask your players to kind of solve the mazes? One kind of amusing problem I ran into back when I was doing mazes in that literal sense is my players would just say, all right, we're going to hug the left wall and we're going to take as much time as it takes and we'll solve the maze. And it was like, well, that was less exciting than I imagined. So how do you present the maze for your players to get through?
Yeah, so I've done this like in two ways. So one time I tried to run it pretty straight, just you gotta figure it out. We were drawing sort of top down on a map, but it's like, we go to the end of that hallway, like is there a left and a right? And they work their way through it. And that was profoundly not fun for, I think, everybody at the table. Because, it turns out like when you're doing a maze and you're sort of drawing the maze as you're going through it, it's just, it feels arbitrary, right? And because for all intents and purposes, it could be arbitrary. I could just be drawing it as they're going,
Yeah.
like that. So that was not great. The other time that I've done a very explicit maze was in the Halloween one shot that I ran.
That's right.
This past year. So they were in a corn maze for that, and that I just abstracted out almost entirely. Rather than it being them taking, the left and the right at the right times, it was more just they encountered a couple of difficulties when they were in the maze, and other than that, they were just sort of lost until they got over the difficulties, and then they could find the end.
So were they rolling to like increase the speed with which they got out of the maze, or did you not even do that?
See, do I want to reveal my secrets?
That's okay. So we can
Yeah.
transfer this to a hypothetical situation.
Yeah. Hypothetically, what I might have done is just kept presenting problems to them until it was clear that it was time for the maze to be done.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they were otherwise bored or we needed to move on.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. Yeah. So I ran that game twice, and I think both times it was, 4 or 5 difficult things that happened that they had to make a decision about, and then they could find the end of the maze.
So mazes are in, a lot of movies and books, right? But I wonder if the purpose that mazes serve in those other media just isn't quite very well served by using them in RPGs as much. I mean, because so why would you have a maze in an RPG? Obviously, one reason is for like setting realism or verisimilitude or whatever the term is, right? So if the rats live in a maze-like warren, then, there's a maze because it makes sense. But, in books and movies, mazes kind of serve this narrative purpose of separating the heroes from the environment that they understand and are comfortable in. It creates this confusion. It provides this sense that they've maybe, as they get to the end of the maze, a sense that maybe they've gotten in too deep, so they won't be able to get back out easily. I mean, there's other more, I guess, metaphysical purposes to which mazes are put in stories. But so why would you put a maze in an RPG? And would you ever put one in because it serves a purpose other than just like logic? Like, oh, the trolls live in a maze, so I guess we have to have one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, the trolls might live in a maze, but, like, why? Why do they live in a maze?
Right.
I think it's a totally fair question. It's like, yeah, to what purpose does it serve?
So let me bet in there, because one cool purpose they could serve, but I don't know if I've ever really managed to evoke it in games, is when you think of like mazes in horror movies, right? I just watched through the Lord of the Rings movies, and so with my son, and in the Shelob, like giant spider part, she basically lives in like the equivalent of like a maze. So so Frodo is like lost, he's bewildered, he's subject to like surprise attacks from unexpected directions, while he's in there. And I think of other horror movies, like you probably haven't seen The Descent. That's like a spelunking horror movie. That whole movie is like them lost in a maze of caverns, and that somebody else knows really well that they don't know as well. So they're totally just at the mercy of these creatures that live there. You can jump out at unexpected times, that sort of thing. So that does work well in the sense of like giving creatures like kind of maze-like layers, but it also is a heck of a challenge to evoke that particular experience in an RPG. So I'm sorry, I just monologued while you were trying to talk, but
No, that was great. Yeah, I'm thinking about it. Yeah, it's a defensive, maneuver, I guess, to set up a maze. As you're talking, like, Shelob, like a troll, like those sorts of things, or even the cave and the descent, like, those are all like naturally occurring mazes, right? So I think there's something about like the cave is a maze that's really primal to RPGs, and I think also just like humanity, right? The thought, like, I could go into this cave and there could be like a crevice that I have to go through, and then it just kind of keeps on going and going and going, and you don't know what's out there. And like, that's a cool idea, but I think a lot of times what ends up happening with mazes in RPGs is they're put as sort of they're not the destination, they're like an obstacle to get to the thing, get to something past them, rather than it being like, oh, there's this cave, and like inside the cave there's a piece of treasure, so you can go in there and you can navigate and you can find the piece of treasure and then try to get your way out. It's often like, someone set up shop in there that you have to go go take care of them, or you have to go through it to get to the, something else on the other side. And then it just seems like more of an impediment rather than the thing that you're doing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and if the maze is an obstacle you have to get past on the way to your destination, as it is in a lot of adventures, what can the maze do to you in an RPG that is effective? Is there? It can slow you down. That seems like the main way it could challenge you, but it's generally my experience that like the threat of delay is not a very exciting one. For an RPG challenge. We could imagine a scenario where there's this huge time crunch. But, if your players roll poorly and it takes like 4 hours to get out of the maze instead of 2, maybe you've worked that into your plot, but also that sounds kind of tedious and boring. And why did we even bother having the maze there, right?
Yeah.
So when I think of like travel obstacles, if you think of a maze as like a travel obstacle, that becomes interesting when the players are presented with choices about how they want to handle it.
Yeah.
So, can you give players interesting choices about how to get through a maze?
Yeah. You mentioned like taking, using the left-hand rule in a maze, just hugging the left wall until you get out of it. If you presented that as an option to the adventuring party, it's like, you can do this. You don't know how long it's going to take, and it might not result in, in you being able to get to the next area soon enough, and then maybe the princess is in a different castle when you get there, that sort of thing. That's an interesting choice, because it's like, okay, look, we all know you're adults. We all know that you understand how you could just defeat this maze, but if you use a little bit of your wits about you, there's going to be some sort of advantage to you at the end of it. But I'm with you too. Like, the difference between 4 hours and 2 hours is just an annoying 2 hours. The difference between like, okay, we made this one decision and then let's sort of see how that plays out. Like, we made the decision to do the left-hand rule, and that's going to result in this, or we're going to go through it and then that'll result in something else, right? Like, so I think there's like a gradation there of consequences, right? It's either got to be like something very bad happens, or you've decided to go through it, and then if you get through it, then it's sort of fine.
Yeah.
At that point.
It occurs to me as well, remembering back to when my players would say, oh, we're just going to follow the left-hand wall. And as GM, it's like, oh, I can't really say no to that. That's a reasonable thing to do. But, people get lost in mazes even when they're trying very carefully to keep track of where they are. Like, so my daughter had a birthday party one year at this like farm, and they had a big corn maze. And I went in there specifically like trying to be all cool and smart, and I got like really lost in the stupid corn maze. And also we had like, the bus was leaving in like 7 minutes, and there was like 12 kids still lost in the maze that I had to get out. So there was extra pressure. But so there is that thing of, like the players can say, we're going to solve this maze using strategy X, Y, or Z. But, I still think as GM, you have the right to say, well, you certainly set out to solve it that way, but you must have screwed up somehow because now you are lost and that strategy isn't working for you anymore. Yeah,
and I think there's also, like, if you really don't want them to use that, and it's super important that they go through this maze the right way, have there not be a wall, in a few places, like make it so they can't just use the left-hand rule. They have to make some sort of decision about, okay, well, now we're going to go on the right side instead, like when are we going to double back? Or there's 2 levels, or they have to go down ladders, and like I think there's ways to add some simple stuff to a maze to make it so they can't just use the brute force strategy.
Yeah.
But like all that to say, like I think whenever you encounter this problem where there is sort of an obvious and easy solution, like if you take that away, it's like, well, like what are we doing? Like why is there the maze? Like what's the fun part about it for a party? And maybe that's the question we should be asking is like, like what would a fun maze look like? Is a fun maze one that takes you 4 hours to get through because everybody has to sit there and make a detailed map to get through it? Or is a fun maze something that has 2 or 3 interesting routes in it, like kind of decisions that you have to make?
That's a really good question. I don't know I can't say that, I really love the idea of mazes, as our discussion so far has been kind of negative towards, using mazes in RPGs. But, so what do mazes do in the fiction? What does a maze do? It bewilders you, it disorients you, right? So if your game has some sort of way of applying an effect or something like that to the players that's like bewildered by the maze or feeling all turned around or something like that. Like if you're playing a game like maybe Fate or something like that, where you could slap an aspect or something like that on the players, that it creates a little bit of a mechanical challenge for them in tackling whatever it is they're trying to do next. So maybe they made it to the center of the maze to fight the boss, but along the way they failed some roll or something like that, and they all are feeling, just confused.
Yeah, I think as we're talking, I'm just defaulting to D&D because that's where a lot of these mazes pop up. But I think you're right. Like having some abilities to affect the narrative in other ways would make them more interesting to run through. I'm also thinking about, because Lord of the Rings, right? Like the Mines of Moria sequence.
Oh, for sequence. Sure. Yep.
Yeah, it's like that is in a lot of respects it's a maze that they're going through. Right, like they first try to just go over it completely. They try to take the brute force method, and then they're forced back, and then they have to go through the mines. And bad stuff happens. They navigate different things. There is only, I think, in at least the movie version of that, there's one moment where they have to sit there and just sort of think about, are they going to go up or down, like left or right. But other than that, they're just sort of charging ahead and taking the next step, because they sort of know where things are at that point. And that whole sequence is exciting and riveting and has lots of stuff happening the whole time about it that would not happen if it's like, okay, now we're going to sit here and I'm going to say, you got to go 20 feet and then there's a left and a right junction. Yeah. Yeah.
It's funny you should bring that up because as a kid, one of the earliest games I ran was the Middle-earth role-playing game. And I had a book which I loved reading on Moria. But I never ran it, and the main reason I didn't run it was actually I didn't know how I could handle a dungeon-y maze that was that big in scale. Because at the time I didn't really have a good sense of when I could abstract travel. And even now it would be a little bit of a challenge for me to think about how do I want to represent that they're just navigating their way through this city-sized labyrinth. So yeah, that's interesting. But Moria is a perfect example. You could enter it. So the Fellowship of the Ring enters it, and they have a guide who is 80% sure he knows how to get through, right? So they have to pause a couple of times where he tries to remember which the path is. And it does create a couple of interesting stop and get your bearings scenes in which something else exciting can happen, right? So there's that one scene they're stopping, getting their bearings. They have that character beat with Gandalf and Frodo talking about Gollum, and another one they get to Balin's tomb, and the scene sort of pauses, and then Pippin fumbles his dexterity roll or whatever, and I don't know. Yeah. I'm getting carried away here, but
yeah, I mean you could map that out in a D&D style thing, but I think importantly the lesson that I would take from that is it focuses a lot more on what you said, those character beats and the pauses rather than the navigation part of it. And I think if there is something in this conversation that I'm drawing out, it's the navigation of the maze is the least fun part of it for me, at least. It's about all the pauses, all the different things that happen when you're in a maze. The despair that you might feel while you're in there is way more fun than okay, well, we went left this time, let's loop back around and take a right this time.
Yeah, and if you've got a group of enthusiastic role players, being lost in a maze, especially the dangerous kind you're likely to be lost in if you're in the Dungeons and Dragons world, it's a stressful experience, right? So if you have a group of enthusiastic role players, you could pause periodically and just ask them, play out a scene. You two have a disagree about whether you should go left or right. Do a quick role play it out and let's see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, because if they're heroes and you're telling a heroic story, they're going to get to the end of it. They should not die because they walked in a, we're walking through the maze. It should be about something else. I keep thinking about you going into that corn maze trying to round up kids when the bus is about to leave, and that sounds like the most stressful maze situation possible.
It had rained, so it had rained massively an hour before. And so it was the ground was all mud with standing pools of water. And I had not worn boots. I was in work shoes. So I'm doing all this. The bus is leaving. The kids are lost. I am now lost. I'm trying to avoid like stepping into one of the puddles, and inevitably I like slip and face plant. So it was
Yeah.
like actually a great little role playing scenario
Yeah.
that I can appreciate in retrospect. But
Yeah, the buses in the background, they're like honking the horn. Someone saying like, "We're gonna head back without you."
the
Thunder
that
cracks.
maze, is kind of interesting. I don't know how you would do this in an RPG exactly, but that maze had it was a very big one, but it had little basically towers here and there that you would
Mhm.
occasionally round the corner, and there was a tower where you could climb up, go up there and get like the lay of the land, if you will. It made me
Mhm.
think of like in The Hobbit, not to go overboard on Tolkien. When they're
Yeah.
lost in Mirkwood and Bilbo climbs up to the top of the trees, and
Oh
there's
yeah.
that beautiful moment where he. Anyway, it was less beautiful in my real life experience, but
Yeah, you got up there and like, Tommy, like, yeah.
so I have a quick question. Would you ever, when the players get to a maze, could you ever imagine it being fun to present the players, not the characters, with a maze or some sort of a puzzly game, and I don't know, time how long it takes them to solve it or something like that, and have that be incorporated into the have an effect on the fiction of the game? Would you ever be
I
like,
think with
here's I printed out this maze, solve it, and you guys get through. But every time you hit a dead end, I roll for a random encounter or something like that.
yeah, that could actually be a lot of fun. Now that you're saying that, I really like that idea. And you could even do it such like maybe there's if you have like 5 players, you have 10 pieces of the maze that you've cut up,
Hmm.
and like you have entrances and exits for each of them, and like distribute them amongst everybody based on like maybe highest intelligence. They decide who's going to be their navigator.
Yeah.
That person gets 3 of the papers, and then they decide who's going to be the person running up the rear. Like maybe they don't get any, something like that. And then they have a certain amount of time to finish all the mazes and put it together, and figure out how do they get to the end. Like that could be really fun. I think it's just the like D&D walking through a maze is not as interesting. But I think like with the right group, anything can be a good time.
I was thinking about mazes in those video games that we mentioned at the beginning of the episode here. And you know what? Those mazes are usually there's usually something to them besides just like navigating through the maze. So I remember in Zork 3 has a famous, well, I guess relatively speaking, maze. I mean,
Yeah.
in which it would be one thing if you just had to solve the maze, which you could do by trial and error. But in this one, you have to move some of the walls of the maze to get the maze to work. It's a horror. It's like a viciously cruel puzzle, but
Yeah.
and like Bard's Tale would have these mazes, which wouldn't be very exciting if all you had to do is just find your way to the exit. But there were teleportation traps around that would teleport you to a different spot in the maze, and you would be challenged to like orient where you are in the maze. And I feel like that would be tricky, to replicate those particular things in an RPG. But
Hmm.
if you gave the players some other problem that they were trying to figure out, that solving it would basically let them solve the maze, I wonder if
Hmm.
that might be a different way to do it. Basically, the challenge of the maze is not to roll to find your way out of it, but to try and figure out how these teleporters are working.
Mm.
And once you figure that out, sure, you time and trial and error will get you out of the maze.
Yeah, I like that. I think we're finally to the point where like now I'm like, okay, mazes are really cool. Where we started,
Yes.
like all of our conversations started like mazes are dumb, they're terrible, it's never gone well for me. But now it's
That's
like,
right.
oh, there's lots of cool ways to approach a mazes,
Yeah.
which shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who's ever listened to this show.
Yeah.
But it's yeah, I mean, like now I want to try the cut up maze thing. I want to try exactly what you said. Like with there's some sort of like thing they need to figure out that's more of a logic puzzle. I think is that allows them to unlock enough of it just to like, okay, well you've solved the maze, but
Yeah.
the hard part was getting this part of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, we should wrap up there
Indeed.
with our with our grand.
How on earth, Chris, did we just talk for like a half hour about mazes? I don't
I don't
I don't
know.
have any feelings about these, and I rarely use them, but
Yeah.
now I want to.
Well,
So
Yeah, now you have feelings about that. All right, well, Andy, since you rolled, you get to replace the topic. Do
Oh.
you have anything that has been burning inside of your mind that you really want to make someone talk about?
yeah. So I mean, well, no, but I'll try and think of something real quick here.
Yeah, it is your podcast after all. So
it is my podcast. I could put whatever topic I want on this table. Wow, the power. All right. I'll try to be responsible with my power. So here's a question I don't think we've discussed. What is a time period or a historical setting that would make for a wonderful role-playing setting or an environment, and why?
Nice. That's good. All right. Well, we will add that. And someone out there who's listening to this is just like, they need to talk about this. So hopefully, hopefully you get on here and you can roll that one.
Yeah, we'll need to get a guest on here because otherwise it's going to be me talking about Constantinople for about 30 minutes. We don't want that.
Please don't do that to me. Yeah, and I will be just talking about how great the 1990s were.
All right.
Which is not true, but also think about it. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for listening. Again, we really appreciate it. We always love hearing from you too. So please reach out if you have listened to this and you like it. If you have any comments or constructive criticism, we're open to that. I don't really want to hear it if you didn't like it. Just find a different podcast, I guess. But that's my line in the sand.
Right, and tell us what other podcast you found that you like better.
Yeah.
I'm always looking for good recommendations.
Yes, that's not a bad way to approach that. All right, well, I've been Chris Salzman.
I've been Andy Rao.
And remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM.